The practice of dowry, it can turn what should be a happy time into an absolute nightmare. We're talking about harassment, abuse, and sometimes even death. So today, we're going to break down the specific legal shields India has put in place to protect women from this kind of cruelty.
All right, let's dive right into the deep end and talk about the most severe offense the law addresses, dowry death. This is covered under Section 80 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, and it's basically what happens when those cruel, relentless demands for dowry end in the most tragic way possible, a woman's death. Now, the law is super specific about this. A dowry death isn't just any tragic accident. No, it's defined as an unnatural death that is directly, and I mean directly, linked to harassment over dowry. And there's a strict timeline involved too.
Yeah, that 7-year mark is absolutely crucial. The law specifically calls this period out because, let's face it, this is often the most vulnerable time for a new bride. The pressure from her husband or his family can be just relentless and incredibly dangerous.
So, to get a conviction for dowry death under Section 80, the prosecution can't just walk in with a suspicion. It doesn't work that way. They have to prove that 3 very specific conditions have been met. Let's break down exactly what those are.
Okay, so here's the checklist. First, the death has to happen within that 7-year window we just talked about. Second, it has to be unnatural. We're not talking about a normal illness here. And third, and this is the real kicker, there has to be proof that she was being harassed for dowry right before she died. You put those 3 things together, and you've got the foundation for a legal case.
Now, this next part is where the law really shows its teeth. If those 3 conditions are met, the law actually presumes the husband or his relatives caused her death. Think about that. It's called a presumption of culpability, and what it does is it flips the script. The burden of proof shifts to them because the law understands just how hard it is to get direct evidence of what happens behind closed doors.
And the punishment? Well, it definitely matches the seriousness of the crime. This is no slap on the wrist. A conviction means a minimum of 7 years in prison, and it can go all the way up to life imprisonment. The message here is crystal clear. This is meant to be a powerful, powerful deterrent.
Okay, so that's what happens in the most tragic cases. But it brings up a huge question, right? What about all the abuse and harassment that doesn't lead to death? What happens when a woman survives? Well, the law's protection doesn't end there, and that's where we get into a much broader legal shield. And that brings us to Section 85 of the Sanhita. You can think of this as a wider net, really. It's designed to catch all the other forms of dowry-related and domestic cruelty, whether they're fatal or not. It makes the act of abuse itself a crime.
The rule itself is pretty straightforward. If a husband, or any of his relatives, are found guilty of subjecting a woman to cruelty, they're looking at up to 3 years in prison, plus a fine. This gives women a real legal path to get protection from ongoing abuse.
And the law is really clear about who's on the hook here. It isn't just the husband. The term relatives is meant to cast a wide net. We're talking about the mother-in-law, father-in-law, brothers, sisters. Pretty much any family member who's involved in the harassment can be held accountable. But to make Section 85 actually work, you can't just throw around the word cruelty. The courts need a solid legal definition. It can't be subjective. And that's exactly what Section 86 does. It lays out the specific kinds of harm that are punishable under the law.
So, the law basically defines cruelty in 2 big ways. First, it's any action that is so bad it could literally drive a woman to commit suicide or cause her serious physical or mental harm. And second, and this is the one that's directly tied to dowry, it's any harassment that's meant to force her or her family to cough up property or money.
Okay, so that's the legal jargon. But what does cruelty actually look like in the real world? Let's break down the different forms it can take.
First up, and the most obvious one, is physical cruelty. This is any act of violence that causes bodily injury. We're talking about everything from a slap to a severe assault. The law sees all of it as cruelty.
Then there's mental cruelty, which can be just as devastating, if not more so. This is the constant verbal abuse, the humiliation, the insults, the threats, any kind of behavior that's designed to terrorize a woman and just completely destroy her mental well-being and sense of self-worth.
And finally, something that often gets overlooked is economic cruelty. This is a really powerful form of abuse. It's when someone deprives a woman of money, controls every penny she earns, or withholds financial support for basic things she needs. It's basically using money as a weapon of control. So when you put all of these sections together, 80, 85, and 86, you start to see this really comprehensive legal shield taking shape. But what's the big picture here?
Why do these laws matter so much?
Well, it really boils down to four key things. These laws are here to protect women from violence and harassment. They're here to deter the whole practice of dowry with some seriously stiff penalties. They're about making sure perpetrators are held accountable for what they've done. And maybe most importantly, they're about empowering women, giving them a legal way out to find safety and relief.
So in the end, these laws are an absolutely vital shield. They offer protection, they offer a path to justice, but it leaves us with a much bigger and maybe tougher question to ponder. The law can punish the crime, but what's it really going to take to change the mindset that causes this crime in the first place?